Okay, so self-introduction. I won't spend very long on this, but it would be impossible to understand my research without understanding where I've come from. So I was born and raised in California, the United States, and I went to a regular public high school, just a regular public high school. My father's a teacher. My mother is a teacher in Hoikuen. My father is a high school math teacher, and he became Kocho Sensei at the end of his career. So I'm from a teaching family. After high school, I went directly to Yale University. And so that's on the East Coast, very different cultural experience, very different class experience, very much elite, American elite. And I studied history there, and I studied education. And I studied kind of Cold War history, America's presence in Asia, in East Asia. Vietnam War, these types of things. Then after I finished my studies, I wanted to see some of the world. So I signed up for a program at Yale called the Yale-China Teaching Program. And this is a very long-standing program that has sent Yale graduates to teach in China for about 100 years. So they just celebrated their 100th year anniversary. So I taught in a university in southern China, a top-level university, and I was teaching classes about comparative history, comparative culture. Of course, very low level because I was just an undergraduate, but it was a chance that's special for Yale-China. And probably the best part about that job was I had a lot of time to travel. So I traveled all around I had 2 months off in the summers and 2 months off in the winter, and I traveled all around these areas. I lived in southern China, I traveled all the way down here, across the Silk Road, down into India. And then in the summer, I took a trip to first Taiwan and then to Tokyo. And to be very honest, I didn't have much interest in Japan. I wasn't very much interested in Japan. As Americans, we think we know maybe what's going on in Japan. We're pretty confident, right? Okay. So then when I arrived in Japan, I was completely shocked. What's going on in this country, right? So I've been all around Asia, and they're doing nothing similar. At that time, I thought, this is so different than the rest of Asia. What's going on? So it was such an eye-opening experience for me. I went to Tokyo, I went to Takayama, I came to Kyoto, Hiroshima, and Fukuoka. And then when I left, I got on the boat in Shimonoseki to go across to Korea. And at that time, I decided, I have to come back to Japan. This place is so interesting. What's going on here? I have to understand especially the difference with China. So, okay. So I decided at that time my next job will be in Japan. No matter what the job is, I want to go and experience Japan. So after I left China, I decided to find a job in Japan. It's not very easy as a foreigner who doesn't speak Japanese and is not a ryugakusei. But I have English, of course, so I became an English teacher. The JET program. In the countryside, I taught in a high school in Gifu Prefecture, Gifu-ken, for 2 years. But those 2 years, of course, I was teaching, but I was learning Japanese, learning about Japan. It was like benkyoukai. It was just for myself to learn, basically. So then I decided from there to go off to graduate school. So I wanted to kind of make something of all of these experiences I had. But I didn't want to go back to the United States because I thought the United States conversation is very closed. I was quite shocked that I could graduate from Iwayuru elite university and know so little about Japan or about Asia. I was quite shocked. So I said, I don't want to go there. I'd like to go to someplace more international in outlook. So I went to the UK, and I went to Oxford University for my master's, and then continued on for my PhD. And when it came time to pick a PhD topic, I could have chosen many things, but I was lucky that at the pub one night, at the pub Rose and Crown in the north part of Oxford, I was drinking one night, and there was a Japanese man there. And I started talking to him, and we shared many drinks, and we got a little bit drunk, and we said, "Hey, nice to meet you," and yeah. And this man was Kariya sensei. So then next week, Kariya sensei, I didn't know. I asked a Japanese friend, and my Japanese friend said that you're very famous. And he said, yeah. How about coming to Japan so we can drink and study together? Okay. So he was very kind to help me to come back to Todai for my doctoral research. So at that time, I decided to start my PhD studies on Japanese policy reforms from 1990s forward. I will explain what I looked at later. But then I spent 2 years at Todai and finished my PhD, went back to Oxford to finish my PhD, and then I came back again as Gakushin Gaikokujin Tokubetsu Kenkyuin at Todai, and for another 2 years. Yep. And then I always thought, okay, my life in Japan is basically finished, right? It must be finished soon, because if I want to be a professor, there's no chance to be a professor in Japan. At that time, even just 5 years ago, there was no chance, 6 years ago, to be a researcher, a real researcher. You can be an English teacher, you can be these types of things, but you can't be a quote-unquote real researcher. So then I was like 6 months away from finishing at Todai, and suddenly Kyoto University has this program called Hakubi. So the Maino Socho is like saying, we have to internationalize, we have to give opportunities to young researchers. Oh, sounds great. I applied and I was lucky to get it. So I started Hakubi in 2012, and then I was here at Kyoto University, but I don't think we had any interaction from 2012 to maybe 2015, right? So those 3 years. Because of course, Hakubi is completely separate than the Kyokuga Kenkyuka toka, right? So it's a very strange relationship. So I thought, again, there's no chance to actually enter. So I just have to, my career will be finished. After Hakubi is finished, my career in Japan will be finished. I will take a position in USA or UK. But then, suddenly, from nowhere, the most unlikely place, the most unlikely tenkai ever, Abe Shinzo.